Welcome back to Taking the Supply Chain Pulse. I'm Megan with St. Company, and thank you for joining us. Today's episode features David Kirshner, the Managing Director at Logisource and former CFO for several large healthcare systems. David brings deep financial leadership experience and a system-level view of how healthcare organizations operate. In this conversation, we explore the challenges that CFOs and healthcare organizations are navigating today, along with the opportunities that emerge when supply chain thinking extends beyond the clinical space. Now let's turn it over to your host, Fred Kranz.
As we do this podcast, my goal is to bring people in from areas other than direct supply chain areas of responsibility. And whenever I can find somebody who has been a chief financial officer, that's like hitting the mother lode. And today we are fortunate to have David Kirshner, who is a managing director at Logisource and who has been a CFO at several large healthcare systems, with us to talk about challenges faced by CFOs, by healthcare organizations, and opportunities that are present if you take a look at things outside the clinical supply chain. David, welcome.
Great to be with you, Fred.
David works with my friend Mark Van Summeren, who I worked with at Capgemini, and Mark is the de facto vice president of marketing and public relations for the University of Michigan. Do you serve the same role for the Boston University?
I have learned working with Mark that the best thing to do is to root for the University of Michigan. So go blue.
I know, isn't that something? Anyway, David, so why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and your current role at Logisource?
Sure. So my career began at EY, then Ernst & Whinney, over almost 40 years ago, believe it or not. And I ultimately was, as you described, ultimately became the CFO at some very iconic health systems, including Boston Children's and the University of Rochester. And very, very fortunate to have seen the industry evolve the way it did, and had some very successful, performance, team performance as well, successes over the years. And one of the things I absolutely was fascinated by when I met Mark 3 years ago was that, and he has a common EY background, Fred, as you know, is that we both felt that supply chain had never really been tapped into as the strategic opportunity that it really is. And during the pandemic, you just could see, just how much more data we would need and how much more talent we would need. And so as the pressure grew to sort of join Logisource, I met with one of the original investors in the company. The company's like 15 years old. It was originally a Bain Ventures company, and it had huge success in retail. The thesis that we could actually do the same thing with healthcare, mostly sort of advanced, sophisticated healthcare systems, really intrigued Mark and I. And so it's been about 3 years. We've had some major successes now. So really, really excited to sort of take what I've learned over the last 3 years as a CFO and share that with you.
Well, it's good to have you here. We talked earlier before we started the countdown on this episode about the fact that I think there are probably, 4 categories of healthcare organizations operating today. And those 4 groups are those that are failing, those that are struggling, those that are barely surviving, and those that are thriving. And yesterday I was thinking about all the places that I'd run supply chains and where they fall into those categories. And I have run small, medium, and large supply chains. And with the exception of one, which is Baptist Health of South Florida, every one of the ones I have run at one point or another has been acquired by someone else and is no longer operating in the form it was when I worked there. So it is a real difficult market out there. How do you feel about that?
Oh, I totally agree. I think as a CFO walking into a new health system today. I like your taxonomy. I think you take a job, you try to get a job at a place, obviously, that has, a real fighting chance of succeeding longer term. I always like to describe them as haves versus have-nots, but we have a lot of health systems today who are really well branded, well recognized reputationally, but are truly struggling financially, and realize that even if they're a have, and I think most of our clients that it's panned out is that most of our clients at LogicSource, and I see the most advanced supply chain people in the country, and continues to talk to people who aspire to that. They are the name brand health systems, like and they are oftentimes already very well recognized. Some of these are the best supply chains that we have in healthcare, and they know that in order to be great at something like non-clinical, you can't do that all by yourself. And in order to get that coaching and expertise and data, the ego they have seems to have been overcome about being the best. They know they're the best. The issue is, can they even be better? And so that's really, Fred, that when I think about sort of how this has gone, the most advanced systems that we have as clients, and there are at least now half a dozen of them, are all of that character. They believe in their ability to be amongst the leaders in health system supply chain management. They're strategic. They have also somehow checked that ego at the door, and they're just moving to higher ground, learning from other industries.
Yeah, let's talk about two things. Number one, who is your primary source of contact when you're looking at an organization to want to help? Is it the supply chain, or is it the C-suite above the supply chain?
It ideally almost has to start with the supply chain, only because from our experience, and I have many CFO relationships where the first thing they want to do, of course, is bring their supply chain person, and nobody wants to, go over the top of someone that you either have reporting directly to you or indirectly through the COO or the CAO. So you want to deal with that, but it really helps to have the supply chain person much more curious about this, much more at least interested in learning about it. That sets the CFO up for sponsorship, because I think, we're all ready to sponsor, but you don't want to fight the organization. And this really is an executive, decision. At the end of the day, we need the CFO there to ultimately give it the imprimatur that the data is reliable and the opportunities which are often in the multi-millions are realistic and achievable.
Okay, so let's do this little scenario. I'm a supply chain guy. I'm running a mid-size IDN, and I'm doing a great job with my med surg supplies, and I've even made friends with my pharmacy guys, and I'm helping them. So I've got maybe between the two of them 50% of stuff under some kind of contract. How would you approach me to tell me about non-clinical supply chain opportunities? Could you define that and tell me, say, Fred, this is where we think we can help you more? Because then, sure. And this is the other thing that we haven't. The reason I ask you the first question is this: strategic leadership is a difficult thing when you have to lead up. Because I have been in many places where I've had great ideas, and I have been stifled by leadership in the C-suite that just A, didn't get it, B, didn't want to get it, or C, didn't think they had to get it, which is a very difficult thing. So leading up, introducing the ideas and concepts to the people at the highest level of the organization becomes a challenge too. So tell us about the opportunities that you see in non-clinical supply chain.
Sure. I'll tell you a true story. This is 3 years ago. I'm the CFO, and the supply chain person who I just really respected and thought she was doing an amazing job had come from other organizations, and she's in my office, and we're talking about the whole transformation project, the performance improvement initiatives in supply chain, of which there are many. And she says, David, she says, if I just could help the information systems department, the IT department, with their procurement, their contracting, because I'm not even allowed to touch that. I can tell you the impact I'll have is enormous. So talk about leading from, to the CFO. I will never forget that. And when I saw Logic Source, I was like, yep, she was right. The opportunities in areas like corporate services, facilities, maintenance operations, marketing, corporate services, financial things that even we as CFOs do. What I now know, Fred, is based on the analytics I've done, and oftentimes this starts with just looking at a dump of the accounts payable disbursement over the past year, is that I may have several hundred vendors. And oftentimes what we'll find is the contracts in areas that are like dietary, energy, facilities, marketing, our social media placements, obviously all things information technology, which today are huge expenditures on the average of about 22% of the whole budget. If I'm going to approach the budget process in 2026 or 2027 with any level of additional rigor, I need you and I to partner on the idea that you would be active in all the purchasing, all the sourcing, with a very tight partnership with each one of these chief, the chief executives overseeing IT, facilities, and finance, corporate services, legal, for example, is another one. These are all areas where I would have normally gone as the CFO directly to the executive running that group. What I'm going to do is add the suggestion that they work with you, because I want you to be able to give them the skills and talent you have to actually think through what might be going on outside of healthcare in retail or other industries. And I also want you to be part of the contracting. I feel like that's the key point of opportunity for the CFO, is really to lead into that. Ask you to just stay curious about it. Be open to. I know it's those areas are areas they have expertise in, but you will learn, as we all have had to, that there's expertise out there. People that are doing way more in whether it be information technology is one of my favorites, because it's one of those areas where you would think it's all epic, but it's not, or it's all Oracle. Even Oracle and Workday alone have many support structures, as you know, that have to be procured, and there's huge opportunities there.
Yeah, and there's two things about what you're saying here. Is number one, historically, healthcare has been sort of there's been adversarial relationships among departments. So if you were in food service, for example, I know everything about food service, you know nothing, so I'm going to take care of all my stuff.
Right.
And it's to the detriment of those folks. So the challenge becomes, and it sounds to me like part of your challenge, it would be to tell the food service person, look, we have some real opportunities that we've been able to show people over time. And in order to do that, you have to bring in the expertise of your supply chain folks in sourcing, contracting, and purchasing to be able to optimize that. So you sort of broker exactly that relationship. Is that fair?
That's very fair. And, I can only tell you funny stories about during my Logic Source tenure now, talking to people. I mean, we're talking about the people that run supply chain at HCA, or, you name it, big health systems in the top 10 in this country, that tell me that the number one area they save money in was Pepsi pours, dietary related, food related, or IT related savings, because those are the ones that we don't have the time and the expertise to really look at. And so I think when you go to represent, and this is true of finance too, Fred, just to be honest, I mean, I've had IT departments, many who have their own finance person, and I don't necessarily deny them that, but I also know that if they don't have the expertise that we need for capital budgeting, whatever, we need them to really partner. That is my mantra for almost all of these departments, that they all need to know that finance is there to be enabling and supportive. Same thing with supply chain. So that's how I think the emotion works best, is have the supply chain people know you don't expect that they'll do everything by themselves. They're going to work with the department and they're going to learn a lot, and it's challenging, but it's a very fulfilling thing to know that you're covering, the entire waterfront, the non-clinical, as much as you possibly can.
Yeah, and my experience has been that most supply chain folks would be eager to have the opportunity to help their peers.
I think so. Absolutely. Because every dime we spend, right, Fred, every dime we spend on non-clinical can go to support the margin that then can get reinvested in the clinical. And these days, that's such a big deal.
Oh, yeah, and I'll try my math analysis out on you and tell me if you think my logic is off. I've always told people that everyone's always concerned about revenue and reimbursement optimization.
Sure.
But I tell people, look, if you're running a 5% margin, which means you're doing pretty well, actually, compared to most people, you have to get $20 worth of revenue to get $1 worth of profit. So the impact of saving $1 in operations is the same as receiving $20 worth of revenue. Mm-hmm. And people don't look at it that way. They always focus on revenue optimization versus really getting into operational optimization and reducing costs. Is that fair?
That's absolutely fair. I mean, think about the amount of money we spend on growth and marketing and expanding revenue. And then think about the amount of money we spend looking at the things we're already buying. And, it's sort of like, that's a truism. Most CFOs will share with you that it's the claim you already generated that you need to collect. That's where your bottom line margin comes from. Same on the expense side. And where it's non-labor, you're really mostly looking at the margins that some of the vendors are able to get without us really pushing back very much.
Before we dive back in, you may be asking yourself, is my supply chain future ready? At St. Company, we don't just optimize logistics, we engineer smarter, leaner, and more resilient systems from end to end. From manufacturing to retail to healthcare, our experts bring decades of experience and cutting-edge strategies to transform your operations. Visit and discover how we're shaping the future of supply chain, one solution at a time.
Yeah, and what is the sort of real operating margin that most people are working with these days?
Oh, we're down to 0.5% to 1%. And so, if you're really cooking, you're really moving, you might be up around 5%. Obviously, ideally we'd be at 5. That's what you would need for cash flow to replace CapEx and do everything you need. So most of us are bumping around a point where capital, is starting to really get pinched, and you just don't have the margin to be able to support the kind of debt issuances perhaps that you ultimately want to undertake for new buildings. It all sort of starts back with the operating margin as the board's most powerful tool. To right size, no matter what your balance sheet looks like, you still need to run an operating margin of something. So I think the last several people I've spoken to in our world, really looking at this as a way of achieving, maybe an extra, point of margin, is really looking at supply chain and really understanding strategically how valuable it is. It was such a back office function, Fred. You and I have talked about this. I just don't even think I paid much attention to it. Much before Boston Children's, where my colleagues there, many of them are still there, really put some spend analytics in. We never really even talked about, supply chain as this sort of really important sourcing capability. Everybody just jumps to buying. And it's like, no, way up in the front is this whole question of who do we want to partner with? And when you're sort of thinking about what we really can do going forward, and I think this is really where, you see the really advanced systems going. It's really in getting a supply chain leader right to the executive table. They're part of how we make our major decisions.
Yeah, you just brought up two things. Number one, talked about Boston Children's, and I'm very familiar with Boston Children's with Henry Thomas Swallow and Andrew Singer.
Yep.
And they've done things right. They have taken an orderly approach to optimizing their operations over time. They have built competence, and then they build confidence with the C-suite. And when those two things happen, you have an opportunity to achieve something. And how difficult is that to get that message across when you're going in and defining? Do you do like a quick assessment of, well, these guys want to get something done, but they're short of leadership skills in this area and that area? And how do you approach a potential client, and how do you make a case that will be acceptable by them without offending them?
Yeah, and I think everybody's a little bit different. People like to be approached differently. Timing's a big issue. Fred, I would say for most of the health systems we talk to, where we do what we call a mutual value analysis, it's almost a no-brainer. But the real question is collecting that data, or, I'll just say this, part of it is having the data and making it available in a relatively efficient time frame. Then we get about, say it takes 3 or 4 weeks to do that, and then you get another month to actually start looking at the data. And all of a sudden, you start to see things you didn't even know were there. And I can tell you that's exciting on the one hand. On the other hand, it's sort of like, is that real? Do we really believe it? And so ultimately, what I think we know is that a lot of people have been chipping away at non-clinical, but they don't necessarily know how to get it all. There's still a lot of juice to squeeze. And so part of what I think has been helpful is to look at the data, let the data drive the decisions with your supply chain executives and your C-suite, and realize that you've got so many things to do. Something like Logic Source, I don't even think would have existed in healthcare. I mentioned this to you the other day, that we really feel that within the last year, the health systems are finally getting to this point where they know they can't achieve these margins without some outside help, and there's absolutely a opportunity now to improve from good to great on non-clinical. And so from my point of view, it takes the supply chain person to sort of recognize that it's absolutely fine and in fact appropriate and helpful for them to participate with some sort of outside information other than just sort of looking at some benchmarks within healthcare.
It's sort of a mess when you think about it, but it's a mess of opportunities too. I mean, if you show up today in New York City, you're going to have 3 of the major hospital systems with all the nurses out on strike, and you got to figure out how to do something about that. So labor issues is a big thing, reimbursement's a big thing, political impact's a big thing, and you're talking about a proactive approach in a totally disruptive time. That's a heck of a challenge.
It really is, and it takes some real focus and some real expertise. And I think as we've been looking at, what data, for example, is available to some of the health systems, there's so many limits on what you can get out of your own ERP system or the GPO, that starting to unearth and look at this data differently and having the judgment of your own supply chain leaders looking at this with our experts at LogicSource. We've got, close to 400 people doing this every day, that you're you're starting to educate everybody about the markets, and they're all moving so fast. The tariffs really, Fred, the tariffs, I think, really accelerated everyone's concerns about, what am I paying? How do I know that some of these prices are just crazy? And obviously, when we look at how we want to target cost savings over what we spent last year, you really almost can't sit still. So whether it's getting data from organizations like LogicSource, or doing things together and talk. I mean, I know this is true of the supply chain leaders, because we talk. Ed Hiscock is a dear friend. There are a number of supply chain leaders that I've gotten to know as a CFO who I really like to listen to. And what Ed has always said to me over time, and recently at a meeting we were at together, is the data itself is illuminating. What you do with it, and these are all relationships, these vendor relationships are all important. They're very impactful. Is you treat the vendor with utmost respect. And by doing better contracting, by doing better sourcing and competitive analysis, you're a much better customer. And I feel like that's a big part of what we just didn't do. We just accept there's 2 or 3 vendors. This is what it is, and there you go. And that's just not the way it needs to be. I think there are expectations as CFOs and supply chain leaders together, I think, should be much higher now. They have to be higher.
Yeah, and I would have to say that what I've observed over time is we have morphed from a totally transactional and adversarial approach to a much more collaborative approach.
Yes.
And we have always used to talk about partnering, and I used to define partnering as I'll partner with you as long as I win and you lose. And now we are starting to understand the value of true collaboration with the suppliers. And I would also say that you talked about Ed just retired, but yes. I would say that the new group of supply chain leaders are much more sophisticated and better prepared to be able
Absolutely.
to lead collaboratively upward. And I say lead upward because you got to have good supply chain people to properly inform the C-suite, which has different capabilities, different specialties. I mean, you're a finance person, so I would have to inform you about things that would fit into your value structure that would make you want to support the building of a collaborative approach. I think what you guys are doing out there is sort of creating a template for a
Exactly.
new way of leading organizations. Is that fair?
That's very fair, and I think that's part of, when you ask the question of what you do when you're a new CFO in an organization, and I think a lot of people listening may relate to this, but usually, like Mark and I would do a maturity model for supply chain. If you were lucky enough to know Mark Van Summeren, and you were a new CFO, and Mark were to walk in with a maturity model, you would decide with your team where you were. How sophisticated are we? And I think, people may not know this, but most organizations do have things that are very mature and very sophisticated and things that are not. Nobody does everything perfectly. And so when you start to unpack the maturity model, I think it's a little less threatening to everybody. You can't build Rome in a day. And what I feel like LogicSource does is it accelerates you through that maturity model in indirect in a way that's probably taking you within 3 years what might have taken 10, because you could hire a lot of people, and people do, but you won't know what we know. You won't know what's possible to know from other industries, just because all that data and history over the last 15 years is there. So I find that to be remarkable, and very much what I think about when I'm thinking about what do you do now? What opportunities do we still have? You're right. It is a little messy, but boy, are there a lot of opportunities that we can pinpoint and execute pretty quickly.
Yeah, and the value that you folks bring, and this is part of. I'm going to be talking with Mark again soon, and he's got his new book about their strategic leadership in the time of AI.
Yes.
The real value that an organization like you can bring to someone is knowing what questions to ask and how to shape the conversation. Because many times the leadership, they have an idea about what they want to do, and oftentimes they also have an idea about how to do it, but they really need to be led through a process that gets them to the correct answers for them. And I think that's what your expertise brings.
Absolutely. And you mentioned Mark's book, and I think we all know this, but one of the things Mark points out is the quality of the questions you ask is everything.
Yeah, everything.
So the more precise and the more experience you have at understanding how a contract should look for landscaping or whatever the case may be,
Right.
The better you're going to do. And I think that's probably one of the greatest values that we can bring.
Yep. So, what have I not asked that you'd like to talk about as we wrap this up? What issue is out there that you'd like to spend 2 or 3 minutes on that I haven't asked about?
Wow. I was just going to give you a sense of just what it's been like from, the 80s and walking into community hospitals as a brand new young CFO. You might see a back room, a loading dock, a purchasing, function, might be coupled with, central supply or something, to the kind of things that we're getting to see now, Fred, that you've lived through, that many of us through the Bellwether League, where you see some of the best and brightest, I didn't even know there was a Bellwether League. And I guess I feel like I want to just make sure people understand is there really are incredibly bright young people that want to get into healthcare, are in our healthcare systems today, who I really think are really worth mentoring. So if you're a CFO or you're a supply chain leader or you're an up and coming person in supply chain, I'm really impressed with the young talent that's coming because they're very facile with the data and very open to sort of looking at things differently. But boy, has the industry evolved in the last, 30 years. I mean, it is night and day what supply chain's about. And I think it's a very fun but very challenging time. But if you're up for it, I think it's a great time to be in supply chain. I really do.
Yeah, remember I started before you did, and the seminal year in healthcare cost management was 1984 with the Tax Equity and Fiscal Responsibility Act, which brought in TEFRA and DRGs and the idea of prospective reimbursement. In the old days, you wouldn't have minded being a CFO back in the 60s and the early 70s, because I would be called in and they would say, Fred, how much do we need to increase our charges this year?
That's right.
That was the question I had to answer. Not could you please contain costs, but how much do we need to increase our charges? Things are way, way different. And the people that we have now are very bright. I think one of the things the Bellwether League brings, and I think one thing that's very important in any organization, is the presence of multiple generations of experience, multiple generational viewpoints, because we old folks are not as bright as the young folks on the technology, but we know how things work over time. And I think that the sharing of that knowledge and expertise across those generations is what will produce the really excellent places.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. Totally agree.
Okay, David. Well, hey, thanks so much for taking time out to be on the podcast with us. And
it's a pleasure.
I hope to talk to you again soon.
Look forward to it, Fred, and good luck with the Miami Hurricanes.
Hey, the Miami Hurricanes are, I hope they win, but it's been a great season no matter what. So thanks again,
Truly.
David. And
thank you,
we'll
Fred.
talk to you soon. Take care.
Take care.
Bye.
You too.
Yep.
Well, that's all for today. Thanks so much for joining us, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button and connect with us online so you'll never miss an episode and can catch up on all the ones you might have missed. Got a topic you're fired up about, or maybe you want to be a guest on the show? Fred would love to hear from you. Just reach out at fcrans@stonge.com. We'll see you next time.